Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I'm your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. This week, we'll continue the story of the Ramayana, where you'll see a clash between two titans. One of them, everyone around him is desperately trying to avoid making him angry. The other one has a magical object that can help him fight anything. The comparison to a battle between the Incredible Hulk and Thor ends right there. The character this week is a disease. Yes, a real disease. Let's dive in. If you haven't heard episodes 6 and 7, it might be a good idea to start with those. But if not, I will provide a quick summary. King Dasharath ruled Ayodhya, and everyone in the kingdom was happy, except for the king and his 3 queens. This was because they had no heir. Dasharath recruited a famous Rishi from another king, performed a couple of complicated rituals, and finally his wives gave birth to 4 sons between them. These were no ordinary sons. They all had portions of Vishnu, the creator, in them. Vishnu was most concentrated in Ram, the eldest and the son of Queen Kaushalya. Vishnu had decided to do this because most other gods had appealed to him to help solve the Ravan problem. Ravan was the demon king of Lanka and had superhuman and superdemon powers, thanks to yet another goof up from my dad, Brahma the creator. Ravan had prayed to Brahma and had been made invulnerable to gods, to animals, and to other demons. Out of arrogance, he neglected to ask to be made invulnerable to humans, and that is where Ram could come in. Ram was an avatar of the god Vishnu, but he was also human enough to get a passing score on the Are You Qualified to Kill Ravan quiz. Ram, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrughna were all growing up, and they were doing what regular princes do. Excelling at sports, arts, their studies. Their teacher was like, "Of course all 4 of these boys deserve their A++ grades." Wait, are you saying they are the princes? I was completely unaware when I assigned them that grade. Even though they were his only students and they wore crowns all the time. All 4 princes were equally great, but one of them was more equal than the others, to borrow a phrase. Ram was the wisest of all, and his brothers completely respected him. In this one feature, this sibling differed very much from all other regular brotherly relationships that often involved shoving, pushing, kicking, and fistfights over comics and video games. This difference was obviously because Vishnu was part of all of them. It would be really weird if one part of Vishnu would quarrel with another. That being said, there will be some examples of polite disagreement between the brothers. We will see those in future episodes. Anyway, after yet another hard day's work, full of midterm exams and equestrian and archery competitions, the family was all lounging by the pool, relaxing and taking it easy. Just then, the butler announced a very important visitor. It was the Rishi Vishwamitra. This had the effect of making everyone really, really nervous. Not because he was a Rishi, although that fact was enough to make any treasurer worry about the wine and food expenses. See episode 5 for more details on that. The king was nervous because it was Vishwamitra. To explain why, we'll put this framing story on hold and dive into Vishwamitra's story for a bit. Vishwamitra was a king. Yes, he was a rishi later, but used to be a king to start with. You might be tempted to think that having hosted several rishis at his palace, he chose the good life and chose to be a rishi living off of rich kings. But this was not so. King Vishwamitra made an unannounced visit to the hut of a rishi called Vashisht. It was just a break from his hunting trip. Vishwamitra's trip, not Vashisht's. Vashisht was a good rishi. He had nothing to complain about. The main reason for this was that he had a calf, Nandini, the baby of Kamdhenu, a wish-fulfilling cow. Wish fulfillment ran in that family, so Nandini could fulfill wishes too. Kamadhenu was born out of a massive experiment in the ocean about which I will definitely do an episode. Anyway, seeing Vashisht all happy, Vishwamitra was curious to know what made him happy. I just dropped in without notice. Your hut looks very poor, and you aren't worried about how you're going to host me? Nah, I'm not too worried, said Vashisht. As he made a silent wish to Nandini, an enormous spread appeared before them. All kinds of wonderful food and wine and the finest of china. Vishwamitra asked, "This has to be magic. We aren't trading with China. In fact, we don't even know China exists, given the Himalayas in between. How did you get this?" Vashisht chuckled and said nothing. A few more magic tricks later, Vishwamitra pressed Vashisht into revealing the source of his magic. And Vashisht did, reluctantly. "Oh, so you have a magic calf that makes everything?" Vishwamitra rushed outside and upon spotting a calf, immediately tested it. A Rolls Royce. He wanted a Rolls Royce. A bright flash and the car appeared before him. Centuries later, of course, we know David Copperfield can play the same trick and make it look just as easy. However, Vishwamitra wasn't satisfied with the Rolls. Vashisht was reluctant though. He said, I know we are in ancient India and guests are treated like gods, but even this is too much. You're imposing. But I have a Rolls. I must have everything that goes with it. Gas stations every couple of miles, a chauffeur, a mechanic, a garage, and miles of asphalt all over the country. I must have Nandini, said Vishwamitra. Sorry, king, no can do, was Vashisht's reply. Vishwamitra, even as a king, had a nasty temper. How dare you defy me? I can destroy you and take the calf anyway. Oh, said Vashisht. You and what army? Why, my army, said Vishwamitra. But when Vishwamitra turned around, his soldiers were on the run, being chased by a massive army that appeared out of nowhere. Except it wasn't out of nowhere. Vashisht had wished for it and Nandini had obliged. Vishwamitra was humiliated. The soldiers manufactured by Nandini had now surrounded him, and he was at the Rishi's mercy. In a scene that might remind you of the climax from Pulp Fiction, Vashisht let Vishwamitra go. But just like the climax from Pulp Fiction, Vishwamitra walked away without the mysterious wish-fulfilling suitcase. I mean calf. And without his dignity. But he got to walk away. If he had learned his lesson then, a lot of things just wouldn't have happened in the Ramayana. Now, Vashisht had made it personal. He had humiliated Vishwamitra. In front of no one since the army had already run away, but that didn't matter. Vishwamitra was humiliated and he couldn't take that. He wasn't going to give up easily, or at all. As most people have done in these podcasts, when you really need something, what do? You go to the Himalayas and pray to the gods. We saw this happen with good people and bad. Manu did it in episode 1, and he was a good guy. Many others did this too, but in pursuit of weapons or immortality. Vishwamitra was wiser than most of them. Brahma was usually the first choice, given he was so eager to please. But what Vishwamitra needed was a weapon. He prayed instead to Shiva. Makes total sense. When you want a weapon to, destroy someone, Shiva, the destroyer, has to be the better choice over Brahma, the creator. Shiva was happy to oblige. With everyone praying to Brahma all the time, it was a welcome change. He granted Vishwamitra knowledge of all kinds of divine weapons. Armed with these, Vishwamitra attacked the one person who had not given in to his tantrums and humiliated him. Vishwamitra attacked Vashishtha's hermitage with everything he had. Vashishtha had 1,000 sons and Vishwamitra killed them all. He was attacking Vashishtha with everything he had, but Vashishtha had managed to survive. This may sound like a Thanos versus Iron Man moment. Remember the planet scene? But it was not. Vashishtha had one powerful weapon with him. It was his staff, called the Brahmadanda. You might be tempted to think that this was like Thor's hammer, but it's more like a lightsaber, but made out of wood, like most playground lightsabers are. This stick could block and absorb anything. As Vishwamitra threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at Vashishtha, the staff blocked and absorbed everything. Vishwamitra was running out of options. There was nothing more to try. He had tried the most powerful divine weapons, something Shiva himself might have used in destroying. He finally tried the Brahmastra, one of the most powerful weapons of all, capable of destroying the entire world. He fired it straight at Vashishtha, but it too was harmlessly absorbed by the Brahmadanda. Vishwamitra finally realized he was not going to win this. Vashishtha, meanwhile, was completely enraged because his retirement plan, his 1,000 sons, were all dead. But he kept his calm. Vishwamitra walked away from this fight, while Vashishtha calmly undid all the destruction Vishwamitra had caused. Vishwamitra went back to the Himalayas and prayed. There are several incidents in his life at this point that I'll reserve for future episodes. After several thousands of years of praying, and finally overcoming many of his conquer the world emotions, Vishwamitra was finally promoted by Brahma to be a Brahma Rishi, a Rishi at an elevated state. It was premature, because Vishwamitra still retained his temper and he retained pride. Finally coming down the Himalayas, Vishwamitra made the rounds, meeting and greeting other rishis, establishing his network. One day, he ran into the one person who had been the cause of everything that had happened to Vishwamitra. All because he had refused to hand over a calf. It was Vashishtha. Vishwamitra saw Vashishtha as his peer in the rishi world, and he greeted him politely by folding his hands. Standard gesture. Vashishtha responded by blessing Vishwamitra, a clear indication that he saw himself as Vishwamitra's superior. Now this would have enraged Vishwamitra, but it didn't. The Rishi's blessing had the effect of wiping away the pride that Vishwamitra still had in his heart. As Vishwamitra turned away, with absolutely no hatred and arrogance in his heart, Vashishtha stopped him. He now recognized the change in Vishwamitra that he had himself affected a minute ago. He embraced Vishwamitra as an equal would. They became friends at this point. Though Vishwamitra was still short-tempered, Vashishtha saw past that and forgave him everything, including the killing of his sons. So that's the story of Vishwamitra. Vishwamitra literally means the world's friend. But don't let the name fool you. Yes, Vishwamitra could be your friend, but if you made him angry, he could probably crush you into a paste or something. He was not the Incredible Hulk, but he could get angry easily, and he still had tremendous powers at his disposal. So when Vishwamitra arrived and spoke to Dasharath, the king was understandably very nervous. As Vishwamitra started saying, I was wondering if you... Dasharath quickly jumped in. Anything, you can have anything, it's all yours. Vishwamitra said, his voice rising, I was only going to ask you if you had any pigs in your kingdom. Are you offering me pigs now? Those unclean animals? How dare you? Dasharath started trembling before Vishwamitra. He knew it. He had only his big mouth to thank. All he could do was hope for a quick ending. But then Vishwamitra laughed out loud. Relax, I'm only kidding. Ah ha ha, you should have seen your face when I pretended to get angry. Kings, ha ha. This joke gets them every time. Dasharath didn't appreciate the joke, but he knew Vishwamitra was capable of genuinely getting angry easily, so he did laugh along, despite his nervousness, and he laughed almost as loud as Vishwamitra himself. He certainly didn't point out that, though Vishwamitra was talking about kings derisively, he himself had been a king once. And look how that had turned out for him. Suddenly turning serious, maybe sensing Dasharath's thoughts, Vishwamitra said, But you promised me anything, so I'll hold you to it. Sure, said Dasharath, anything, he repeated. But now he was less sure. I want Ram and Lakshman. What? Said Dasharath. On loan, said Vishwamitra, just for a little while. And where will you take them? Asked Dasharath. To the amusement park? Quipped Lakshman in excitement. Kind of, said Vishwamitra. I mean, it's actually my home. It's in a park, and I guarantee I will be amused. I mean, there are no rides, and the scary monsters are all real, not paid actors, but I can at least provide overpriced soda and snacks. Monsters? Asked Dasharath. Yeah, you see, I've been trying to do some rituals and say some prayers, but I keep getting interrupted by these demons or Rakshasas. I need Ram and Lakshman to, handle them for me so I'm not disturbed. Rakshas? Said Dasharath. No way. Ram and Lakshman are just teenagers. What are they going to do against Rakshas? Vishwamitra began in a cold voice. Are you going back on your promise? That will make me very angry. I don't think you will like me when I'm angry, he said, with real menace in his voice this time. Dasharath was about to continue the argument, perhaps offering his army as a substitute. Thousands of soldiers capable of killing wild animals with their bare hands is more than a fair trade for 2 teenage boys. But luckily for Dasharath, his minister stepped in. Boss, let the boys go, they'll be fine. Vishwamitra can destroy the demons himself, but he asked for your sons. I'm sure he means to teach them along the way. Vishwamitra said, yeah, whatever he said. Dasharath reluctantly let his sons go with the Rishi. What happens to Ram and Lakshman in the House of Horrors and the real monsters? Spoiler alert, they'll come out alive and not even a bit scared. But we'll pick that story up next week. Some notes on the show. The Brahmadand is a very unique weapon. It doesn't shoot out any stuff but absorbs anything aimed at it. It's a black hole on a stick. Except it doesn't absorb in Vashist himself. Rishis, even patient ones, were treated with great respect. Kings would move mountains to keep them happy. See episode 5 for more details on that. There are a number of things that happened to Vishwamitra in between his visits to Vashist's home. They need to be told by themselves in a future episode or two. You want to stay away from the character this week because this character is the bubonic plague. Who knew diseases had character? The bubonic plague was a disease that devastated the world's population many times. It's curable now, but was quite fatal in ancient times. Bubonic plague, being bubonic plague, had struck a village. The villagers prayed to their king to do something about it. They probably meant for the king to provide medicine and better hospitals, but the king instead commissioned his priests to solve this problem. The priests did what they do best. They prayed to Shiva, the destroyer, and Shiva was happy to oblige, but not himself. While he could have easily destroyed the plague, he chose an indirect approach, sending his home security solution instead. And that home security solution was Nandi. Nandi guarded the village. Pretty soon, plague arrived there to claim its next victim. There was a furious battle and it ended in a stalemate because Nandi and the plague were evenly matched. Neither side wanted to give up, although they each wanted to move on from this one village. They had bigger things to do. Ultimately, they reached a compromise. Nandi would allow plague to go in and pick one victim, and they would each go their own ways. Nandi was shocked, therefore, when the next day, not one but 100 people had died in the village. He caught up to Plague in a fury, demanding an explanation. But Plague's response was simple. He said, "I did only take one victim. The other 99 people, they didn't die because of me. They had a very simple fever and mistook it as a sign of my approach. They died out of fear." Nandi had to let the plague go. That should prove what we already knew, that a home security system is not effective against diseases. That's it for this week. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thanks to all you listeners for your continued support. And for those of you in India, I wish you all a very happy Republic Day. A few more names to call out this week. Bhargavi, Arvind, Tanya, Paritosh, Saroj, and Abhinav. Next week, we'll continue the story of the Ramayana. We'll see how Ram and Lakshman handle the demons, and Vishwamitra does take them somewhere afterwards, where Ram ends up married. Not even remotely Las Vegas-like, but everybody there is trying to win the jackpot. The character next week is not a myth, but a legend. He's a real historical character who's responsible for taxicab numbers. I'll see you next week.